Hi everyone, my name is Herkif and welcome back to my incredibly stupid hardcore world where I'm only allowed to use wooden tools and leather armor. In our last few episodes, we've been quite focused on building, as we've built a nether hub and transformed a cave into an enchanted forest. So in today's episode, I thought it would be quite nice to switch things up a bit, so I've decided to spend some time grave robbing. However, since the graves that I'll be robbing are very old, we can actually get away with referring to it as archaeology. So I crafted myself a brush and enchanted it just to flex on everyone else in my single player world. And now you might be thinking, doesn't the brush count as a tool? And if it does, doesn't this mean that you're breaking the main rule of this world? To which I respond, yes it does. But anyways, I started off by disrespecting the remnants by our mega base, as one of the reasons why I wanted to go off grave robbing was to find sniffer eggs, and rather luckily, I did manage to find 2 sniffer eggs, meaning that we were now able to commence with the child-friendly concept of industrial level incestuous breeding in order to get our hands on a couple new flowers. Though before getting too ahead of ourselves, I thought I might as well do a tiny bit more grave robbing so that I could get my hands on the armor trims. Though in order to get my hands on said armor trims, I had to find trail ruins, so I flew back to my starter base, as there's a spruce forest right next to it. I then proceeded to spend 40 minutes and 27 seconds looking for some trail ruins. Then began our second grave robbing session. And after a while, I had managed to get all of the armor trims available through Archaeology, so I decided to call it a day, though I made sure to take a screenshot of the trail ruins, so I won't have to spend another 40 minutes and 27 seconds to find another one in the future. But with grave robbing crossed off our to-do list, I thought it might be a good idea to get on with the main thing that I wanted to get done in this episode, which is to build a wither skeleton farm, so that we can move on to a more lavish lifestyle that I deserve. So I flew back to my starter base yet again and entered the real nether. The wither skeleton farm that I've decided to build needed to be placed in either a Souls and Valley or a warped forest. So I started flying around in search of a nether fortress placed in one of the aforementioned biomes, though I rather quickly got distracted by a bastion, which I decided to have a cheeky look into in hopes of finding some ancient debris or netherite scraps, but got rather disappointed. So I continued my search, and rather unsurprisingly, I stumbled upon yet another bastion. However, I actually managed to get my hands on a piece of ancient debris this time, which was very epic, though as I was trying to get to one of the chests, a couple piglins came falling down from the sky, which I took as a sign that I might have overstayed my welcome, and shortly thereafter, I ran into our first nether fortress of this search mission. However, this one was placed in a nether wastes and basalt delta, which was rather unfortunate, though I still decided to go in and steal all of the chests, as it would almost be rude not to. And shortly after setting off once again, I ran into yet another bastion where I managed to find another piece of ancient debris as well as an upgrade template, meaning I now had enough to make a netherite ingot, which was very epic. And after having spent a rather soul-crushingly long time, I finally managed to find a nether fortress in a soul sand valley, so I saved the coordinates and looted it. I then made my way back to my base to prepare everything that we'll need for the farm. However, there were 2 things that we didn't have but needed for the farm. The first thing we needed was turtle eggs, so I flew off to find some turtles to which I could force feed the crusty cadaver of their own kind to then watch them reproduce and steal their offspring. However, our first pair of turtles only provided 2 eggs, which I thought was a rather cheap move on their part. So I had to go off and find another pair. However, the next pair I found decided to only give me 1 egg, which was rather infuriating as I needed a total of 4. But after a while, I finally got myself the final egg I needed. So I flew back home once more, and the last thing we needed for the farm was nether bricks. But that is something that I thought I might as well collect whilst at the fortress. So I made my way back to the fortress which we had found earlier and got to collecting the nether bricks. Then all there was left to do was to construct the actual farm. and since I had been such a talented, handsome and smart young man, I had remembered to bring potions of fire resistance to make my life ever so slightly more livable. I then picked out the spot where we would build the farm and got to work. Once the farm was finally completed, I decided to give it a bit of a test, and after a while I had accumulated 3 stacks of wither skeleton skulls, which was very epic. However, to kill all of the 64 withers was probably not going to be as epic, so our next task was to build a wither extermination device, and rather luckily, I managed to find a really efficient design on YouTube, which was quite a relief as the wither killer in my last world was a bit slow. So I gathered all of the things I needed and made my way to the end to construct it. And shortly after starting to use it, I had successfully turned all of my skulls into nether stars. However, in order to craft beacons, we also need obsidian, which I had pretty much completely run out of, and since I couldn't be bothered to go AFK at my gold farm, I decided to go end raiding to steal all of the ender chests I could get my slimy hands on. And after a very long end raiding session, I had finally managed to get enough ender chests for our beacons, so I made my way back to our base and converted some of the ender chests to obsidian. I then crafted myself a full stack of beacons, which was very epic, so I put them in a shulker along with a bunch of iron blocks so that I can set up a beacon wherever I want. But now that we have a basically infinite supply of beacons, I thought it might be a good idea to start setting up our sniffers to get our slimy and greedy hands on some more flowers. And since we don't really have any good place for them in our base, I decided to put them in our cave. Though as I arrived in the cave, I remembered that we have an amethyst geode in the ceiling above our massive tree, so I thought it would be smart to mine out all of the normal amethyst blocks in hopes of having the clusters grow whilst we're setting up our sniffers. I then leveled out an area where our sniffers would begin their journey, and by journey, I mean the endless cycle of incest for my financial benefit. So I made a small enclosure using fences and placed the 2 sniffer eggs that we had acquired from our grave robbing session earlier. Then began the epic and action-packed adventure of waiting for the eggs to hatch, which I spent by jumping around like a squirrel with ADHD. Though once the eggs had hatched and the sniffers grown up, I started looking for a farm that I could use to maximize the resources I could squeeze out of our newly acquired deformed cattle. And rather luckily, I managed to find a design made by Ilmango, which seemed to be both efficient and cheap. So I got to constructing the farm and put our cattle into the hole which I intended for them to spend the rest of their lives in. However, I then started reading the comments on the tutorial video and realized that it was broken, meaning I had spent a bunch of time building it for absolutely no reason. Defeated, I got to digging out an area where our sniffers could walk around freely, which apparently is the best way to farm the sniffer items. This is something which I, personally, find rather off-brand for Minecraft, as we're usually rewarded quite handsomely for actions that would, in the real world, be classified as crimes against humanity. But anyways, after having finished our rather surprisingly humane farm and left it running for a while, we had managed to get our hands on some flower seeds. So I went back to our base with some of the previously mentioned flower seeds and replaced the sunflowers with the new rather phallic looking dinosaur flower. But that is about all the time we have for this episode. So there we have it, the 12th episode of our incredibly stupid hardcore world. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.